morning, everybody, and welcome to the Stokastic MLB Strategy Show. I'm here joined by Adam Scherer, and we've got Mike Lawrence producing the show. Been a minute since Mike's produced one of the shows I've been on, so all good stuff happening. Hope you guys had a great weekend. Like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Adam, how was your weekend?
It was good. Don't really remember what I did. I think, I just kind of hung out, didn't do anything. So, it was good. It was a nice break from the bender I'd been on for the last week. So, much needed.
Yeah, and which I witnessed some of it firsthand. We were out in Chicago, and who do you think had the toughest weekend when we were there? Who do you think consumed the most alcohol when we were in Chicago, and who was wearing it the most?
So, I missed the day that, you guys really drank. And, I mean, obviously from Twitter, I would say Josh. I mean, when I was there, nobody was really going that hard. We went to bed relatively early. I think Josh probably got the drunkest out of anybody in the group, while I was there too.
There is evidence to agree with that.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I would lean Josh, but I don't know. Nobody from the time I got you and I got there the same day. From the time we got there, I think they were kind of already dead and partied out a little bit, so not drinking as heavily.
The thing that I said about the trip that impressed me the most is that Lofty seemed to be drinking the entire time we were there, and it never seemed to affect him.
Taking shots too. I've never been able to take shots, but now that I'm older, I certainly can't. That was definitely true. And also, I think I would like to replace Josh with Joey Corman as my answer.
Well, Joey, who had all issues of his own in terms of the game that him and I played. But yeah, I mean, Lofty, very impressive stuff from him because he did drink the entire time we were there. And I never once saw him remotely buzzed, which I was like, this is fairly impressive. He's just immune to alcohol or something like that. But whatever it is, we've got a baseball show to talk about, 11 games today. And we don't have great pitching options. And one thing that really stands out, if you look at the pitching pricing today, we've got Max Fried and Tony Gonsolin are fairly expensive. And then there's not really anything else that really pops out from a pricing standpoint. So when you're looking at this slate, just at first glance, how do you think a lot of your lineups are going to be constructed?
I don't know. Same as usual. I'll either end up heavy on pitching and spreading it out on offenses or vice versa.
So for me, and it might have been a shitty question, so I'm sorry if I worded it that way, but I don't have any pitchers I feel incredibly confident in, maybe Sean Manaea going up against the Tigers, but I think I'm going to be more spread out a pitcher than I normally would be. I don't think there's any one guy that I really want to be staked to, especially when you look at the ownership. It's like, oh, pitching's so shitty that Chris Flexen's projected for north of 20% ownership. So I just find pitching to be really difficult to parse today. And I was just kind of curious, is there anything that you see at pitching you're like, I'm really confident in this?
No, not particularly. I mean, Manaea going up against Detroit, I agree. He should be probably the most popular pitcher. That looks really good. Similarly, Ashby taking on the Rockies outside of Coors looks good. I mean, I see what you're saying where you have Odorizzi in a good matchup. He's pulling some ownership. Flexen getting ownership is something that's really unusual to see. Same goes for JT Brubaker. So that's all kind of weird. I wonder if the ownership projections change as we get throughout the day, because the thing that really stands out to me is why is Sean Manaea against the Tigers and Aaron Ashby against the Rockies getting similar ownership at relatively similar price points to Brubaker and Flexen and guys like and Odorizzi? I think maybe you see a bigger gap there as the day goes on.
Yeah, I totally agree. And something else that kind of stands out to me is we get right into our first game of the slate, which is the Atlanta Braves against the Philadelphia Phillies. Max Fried is the most expensive pitcher on this slate, and it's not often you'd see Max Fried at 10,500 on the road in Philly, also being fairly popular. 25% ownership for Fried. He is the most popular pay up option on the slate. I mean, I kind of get why, because who the hell else are you going to pay up for at pitcher? But I'm light on the idea of getting to 25% of Max Fried when I could play guys like Ashby or Manaea at the same ownership in better matchups at home for Ashby and then on the road against Detroit for Manaea for considerably lower price tag. So there's guys I prefer to Fried just relative to ownership as of now.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable as well, especially when you consider that they're less expensive.
Yeah, so when it comes to Max Fried against Philly, I mean, to an extent, I guess he's somewhat hard to avoid just because he's a good quality starting pitcher, and there isn't that much of that available to us on the slate. So I'm not looking to stack against him that often with Philly at all. But in terms of Max Fried, if you were looking at him in a cash game, would you rather spend down to get to guys like Ashby and Manaea, or would you be okay with Fried in cash games just because he is picking up a decent amount of ownership right
I
now?
think I would most likely end up with Ashby and Manaea. Certainly not opposed to Fried, like he's a really good pitcher, but I think that there's a big enough price gap there where chances are I'm able to improve my hitting enough that I get to those other guys.
And then as far as stacking against him goes, are you on the same page that he's one of the better pitchers on the slate? The Phillies have a good, but an offense is somewhat lacking without Bryce Harper. Therefore, it's just not really a priority offense.
Yeah, that's how I see it. Not to mention Fried's just a really good pitcher, does a really good job limiting power. Um, it's a good park to hit in, but outside of that, there's just not a whole lot I can say there. Fried this year, 0.45 home runs per 9 innings, 3.16 xFIP. He's a really, really good pitcher, even though he doesn't like he's a good DFS pitcher, but his stuff doesn't translate to being like the legit ace in DFS like he is in real life. But in real life, I mean, the dude's really, really difficult to hit.
And then going up against the Braves, it's going to be Ranger Suarez pitching. Suarez was really good last year, and he's regressed in a fairly significant way. The numbers aren't terrible for him. There is a lack of strikeout upside. 4.13 expected ERA, 18.8% K rate. We do have fairly modest ownership coming in on the Braves right now, which if this is going to be the case, I am going to like them quite a bit. One thing to note, though, is I don't know if you remember this, but the last time the Braves went up against Ranger Suarez, they were also projected for fairly modest ownership in that spot, and they ended up being all massively popular against across the board. So that is something that weighs on my mind a little bit. But how do you view this matchup of the Atlanta Braves, who are now without Adam Duvall for the rest of the season, one of their better guys towards the end of the lineup to use as a salary saving play typically when they're going up against lefties? How do you like them going up against Suarez?
I'm interested in them for sure. I mean, Suarez has done a good job limiting power this year. 139 expected ISO to righties. Only a 19% strikeout percentage, though. Like you said, Duvall being out certainly hurts this lineup, but there's still a lot of right-handed power here. It's still a good park to hit in. I assume it's going to be hot because it's hot here in Baltimore, and the weather's pretty much always the same. So I still like getting to the Braves, especially, you mentioned that we had that game. We've had it a couple times with Atlanta where they're projected for less ownership than they end up pulling. But this is a big enough slate, and I think there's enough good offenses. Like if you look at the top stack tool, there's like 7 teams above 6% and none above 9. So you have a bunch of teams like lumped in there. I think that makes it likely that even if Atlanta's ownership comes up a little bit closer to that 8% top stack mark, that it's not like you get massive ownership there. So I'm certainly interested in getting to them just because they have so much power against a pitcher who's not going to miss bats.
This is a pretty fun slate from looking at an ownership perspective. We don't have any pitchers that are projected for over 30% ownership. There's only one offense on the slate that's projected for more than 9% ownership. That's the Dodgers going up against Paulo Espino. So the ownership is going to be spread out quite a bit, which I think makes the slate really interesting. It's also a time that I really think it helps to look at a lot of the tools we have on the site, whether it's the top stacks tool, the top pitchers tool, all stuff that you guys can get access to. If you sign up right now using the promo code MLB Strategy Show, if you're signing up for the first time, let's get you 50% off your first week of a Stokastic Plus Platinum package. And it's something that's really, really important to me when I'm building my baseball lineups. I wouldn't be able to do it without all of these different tools we have on the site. And I know it's helped a lot of other people win some money as well. So I know we've got Mike some slides to show people the new updated Stokastic Hall of Fame here. So if you guys want to join the Stokastic Hall of Fame, another way to get access to all the tools on our site, you download the Stokastic avatar. You could find that over at stokastic.com/avatar, place in the top 3 of a contest with over 5K entries, and then also tweet your wins to @StokasticHOF on Twitter. Because if you win, sometimes people message me like, hey, I won. Where's my free membership? Well, we don't just know. You have to tweet at us so when we get aware of it. And then also you get inducted into the Hall of Fame, which you guys are going to see right here. So Hall of Fame, I know most recently, yesterday we had a winner. It was Mike Campbell, who's always around in the YouTube chats, also pretty active on Twitter, tweeting at us. He had a nice takedown in golf yesterday, won 5K. And I believe he had Kevin Chappell in his lineup, who was something like 8 over at one point. On Thursday or Friday, and then rallied to make the cut. So Mike had a nice win there. We've also got a win here from Golf Mafia. This is a Formula One win, if I'm not mistaken, because Max Verstappen winning, who apparently, I don't know how Formula One works, but apparently the same guy wins every single week. So that seems like something they need they need to get a little bit more parity in Formula One, because one guy's won like 80% of the races this year. But Golf Mafia took advantage of that information, took advantage of the tools we have on the site, plugged in Max Verstappen in his captain spot, won some bucks over in Formula One. Here we've got a win from Bob Kramatola. Big shout out to Josh Engelman last night. Listened to him and Shit My Money DFS on the Deeper Dive show yesterday and pivoted off of Gaussman. If you're not a Stokastic_com member, it's costing you money. You see right here, Bob pulled down 37 grand. So really good lineup for him. Looks like this was about a week ago. Tristan McKenzie. I remember that was a really good McKenzie start against the Detroit Tigers.
Pretty sure I was on Gaussman that day. So, I mean, I'll gladly take the credit, but did not talk anyone off.
It was all because of Adam. All because of Adam. Everybody gets a little bit of credit to Josh, but a lot of it has to go to Adam as well. Just like us selling memberships on the shows. I've pointed this out, that there's a common trend here. People say that it's the host get credit. I think it's Adam who's selling the most memberships, because
completely agree.
Yeah, absolutely. Another winner here. I got Larry C. Lucky 1710 over on DK. Thanks at Stokastic.com, at Shander Show, at Eric Lindquist, at Digital B21. Sorry, Eric, my Toronto stack won, not my LA stack. I like he wins, but then he kind of finds a way to throw Eric under the bus, which I think should really be a staple of everybody's winning screenshots. Some way you have to throw a backhanded compliment to Eric as well when you end up winning. Another win here. This one's from Dave Oliver. Thank you guys for the great content. He won a grand here on an MLB Showdown contest. I can't see which teams that are in it, but congrats to you. And then I don't know who this is. Alex Baker almost got the W, just needed 5 more homers. Congrats at Steve Buzzard to a nice showing at Stokastic Hall of Fame. So there we got a couple of our guys there who run the projections. Alex, of course, and then DeColt, Steve Buzzard. So first and second for them in an MLB contest last week. So lots of big winners. And once again, if you guys would like to either join the Awesome Hall of Fame, well, get some nice DFS wins, tweet at us over on Twitter, or if you're signing up for the first time for a Stokastic membership package, use the promo code MLB Strategy Show to get 50% off your first week, and you get access to all the tools you need to win money, basically every single DFS sport out there. Stop guessing, start winning, join Stokastic Plus today. All right, back to the baseball slate now, and the next game to talk about, the Tampa Bay Rays at the Baltimore Orioles. Corey Kluber on the mound for Tampa Bay. It's going to be Austin Voth for your Orioles, Adam. Now, as far as Kluber goes this year, he's been solid. There's typically not all that much upside in him. 3.87 expected ERA. The K rate a little bit low at 21.3%. He's not the same pitcher that we saw win Cy Young in previous years. But at 8,300 on DK, he's pretty interesting to me at only 1% ownership, also only going to be 1% owned on FanDuel. When you consider how mediocre all the pitchers are on this slate for the most part, is this a good spot to look at Kluber as a contrarian option?
Yeah, this is definitely a spot where I'm interested to see if the ownership projections change or not. Because again, they kind of just seem like wonky to me right now. But if we assume that it's where they're going to hold, why the hell are Jake Odorizzi and Chris Flexen 25 and 20 times as owned as Corey Kluber? You know, I understand they're a little bit cheaper, but it's not like it's a huge margin. Kluber, like you said, he's not the same pitcher he used to be, but he's still striking out 21% of hitters. 3.92 xFIP is respectable. Meanwhile, you're talking about somebody like Odorizzi with an 18% strikeout percentage and a 4.5 xFIP being 20 times as popular. Chris Flexen, 16% and 5 being 25 times as popular. Makes absolutely no sense to me. So again, I think that the ownership projections on guys like Flexen and Odorizzi do come down as the day goes on, but if for some reason they don't, or even if they come down some and, you know, Kluber gets to like 5%, I don't know why those guys are getting ownership and Kluber's not.
Yeah, and the Orioles offense has certainly been better over the last month and a half, 2 months than any of us could have expected, and certainly better than it was at the first part of the year. But Kluber's been solid enough, and I think he's better than those other pitchers you mentioned, like a Chris Flexen, who's picking up so much ownership, that if things don't change, this is for sure contrarian pivot in large field tournaments. I don't know that I'd be going to Kluber in something like a single in a single entry or 3 max, but large field tournaments, sign me up for a 1% on Corey Kluber on this slate. Are you interested in stacking against him at all with your Orioles?
Somewhat, yeah. Not because I think Kluber's bad or anything, but it's supposed to be pretty warm here again, I believe. I think it's supposed to be in like the 90s all week. So the ball should be carrying in Baltimore. And they still have those solid 6 hitters, 1 through 6, with Mullins, Mancini, Santander, Mountcastle, Hayes, Rutschman, Urias, Odor, Mateo at the bottom. Not the best hitters, but you do still get some upside there. Mateo, obviously, if he gets on base, he's going to steal. He's always cheap. Rutschman's been hitting second recently as well, so that's a nice lineup bump for him. I am interested in the Baltimore bats as well, but I think the way things look right now, the most glaring thing from this matchup is Kluber's lack of ownership.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I'm kind of confused by it just because it's relative to the other pitchers on the slate. It's not to say that Corey Kluber is usually a guy that I expect to get a lot of ownership, but I don't think Chris Flexen ever deserves ownership and he's 20% owned. So,
Right. So, and to clarify, so what I actually think is going to happen, it's not that like Brubaker and Flexen and Odorizzi drop to 15% and Kluber comes up to like 10. I think all of these guys are going to drop, and you're going to get Mania up to like 50 and Ashby up to like 50. Like, so I think that's really what's going to happen is you're going to get all of these secondary guys relatively low owned and then just massive chalk on Mania and Ashby.
yeah, that would make sense to me. I think because I know when I look at it first glance, because a lot of times in the morning when I'm first kind of starting to get ready for shows, I'll hand build a lineup without really looking at too much info, just getting a sense of like, all right, if I was just looking at the pitching matchups and looking at the offenses going up against pitchers, like what would I build if I was hand building a lineup? And Manai would be in that lineup immediately with no doubt about it. So I agree with you. I think he's going to end up being uber chalk on this slate. I'm
Yeah, like
curious
when
to
I
see.
think about what my 150 max would look like at the current ownerships, it's not even, I talked about Kluber being way too under-owned relative to guys to those other guys. But realistically, what my lineups would most likely look like is me just jamming in Ashby and Mania and saying like, okay, if 75% of the field wants to ignore each of these guys, I'm going to just play them everywhere because I think they're clearly the top two pitching plays. So that's kind of what I think seeing the ownership right now, which makes me think that as we get into the day, you're going to see a pretty big bump for those guys.
My neighbor or the guy who lives across the street, he's like 80 years old and he's been doing yard work in his underwear for the entire part of the show. It's very disturbing. I can't miss it. It's what's right in front of me when I'm looking at the camera.
I have a massive view of the entire harbor. I think we have comparable views out our window, it sounds like.
Yeah. He's like raking leaves. This guy during the fall, he raked leaves 18 hours a day. He was obsessed. He just chased leaves around as they fell off the tree. This guy's out of his mind. Anyway, Austin Voth on the mound for the Orioles today. Hasn't been all that great this year. Historically, hasn't always been a great pitcher. 4.76 expected ERA, 21.1% K rate. We've seen a bunch of slates as of late where the Tampa Bay Rays have been popular. It is a fairly cheap lineup, especially because a lot of their better hitters are out right now. Wander Franco, most notably, he's on the injured list, is out for an extended period of time. How do you like this matchup for Tampa Bay against Voth, especially with the weather getting warmer in Baltimore?
Yeah, I mean, it's a nice park upgrade for Tampa Bay. Obviously, Baltimore's not playing as favorably as it has in the past since they moved the left field wall back 30 or 40 feet, whatever it was. But left-handed power is still going to play the same. You have Brandon Lau in the lineup, which, he's going to continue to look like one of the top second base options. G-Man Choi has power from the left side. Josh Lowe has some upside. So I think it's a decent spot for Tampa. Voth has actually been pretty solid for Baltimore as a starter. He's talked about how Baltimore just is more analytically driven than teams like the Nats that he used to play for, and that it's made a big difference for him. But it's still not the type of pitcher that I'm really looking to avoid. 141 expected ISO to lefties this year, certainly respectable. 182 to righties. But again, that park downplays right-handed power. So I think Tampa Bay looks fine. Right now, looking at the top stacks tool, we have them with a 6.4% top stack percentage and 6.4% ownership share. So kind of just seems like a neutral spot. Individually, Brandon Lau, though, looks very, very good.
Yeah, he's been looking good for a while for me. There's been a handful of slates in a row where he's been one of my more rostered hitters just because he's a little bit underpriced right now. Track record of being a really good hitter, just taking him a little bit of time to get that price worked up as he's coming back from injury. But I agree. I think he's a really good one-off play. Next game to talk about on the slate, and it is our guy, Sean Manaea, on the mound against the Detroit Tigers. 3.79 expected ERA, 23.3% K rate. He is most likely going to be my most rostered player by a very wide margin on this slate. And if this ownership was to actually hold true, where he's only going to be in about a fourth of the field's lineups over on DK and then over on FanDuel, he's projected for 17% ownership. He would be in nearly all my lineups of this kind of ownership. I think he's the safest pitching option by a really wide margin. I think he's the most upside of any pitcher on this slate. And then he's also kind of underpriced. So I love Manaea. Is there any kind of pushback against him from you?
No, not at all. The only question I have is exactly how high does his ownership get by the time we by the time lock rolls around. But it's also a situation where, not to say I don't care, like obviously there's a number where I would start getting away from him, but with how mediocre pitching is on this slate, I do think in this spot against the Tigers, he looks like clearly one of the best options. 24% strikeout percentage, 3.94 xFIP this year. Has had some issues with power, but it's not like the Tigers are particularly likely to take advantage of that. So I do really like Manaea, and I think the ownership has quite a bit of room to increase before I start to be scared off.
Yeah, and I think what you said is also really key because I don't think this ownership is going to hold. So you guys do like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, check out the MLB deeper dive and live before lock later in the day because I tend to agree. I think the ownership of Manaea is going to come up. I'm just curious as to what that number is going to be because I don't see any ox against him. He's underpriced. The ownership isn't really there. And then we've also got pretty favorable betting info here just in terms of the Tigers with a 3.8 implied team total, which is one of the lowest on the slate. So I really like the spot for Manaea. I have no interest in getting to the Tigers, especially with Manaea picking a modest ownership. Do you see any case for stacking Detroit?
No, not particularly. I mean, I mentioned that Manaea's had some home run issues this year, but if you look at his expected ISO compared to his actual ISO, 155 expected ISO to righties compared to a 185 actual, 118 expected ISO to lefties compared to a 150 actual. It doesn't seem like he should be giving up the power that he has. Somebody mentioned in chat that there were a lot of lefties in the Tigers lineup, but it's switch hitters mostly. So their projected lineup only has 2 actual lefties, but that's not even that much of a concern here. So far this year, Manaea struck out 24.8% of righties compared to 21.4% of lefties. Gives up less production to lefties, but it's not like it's a huge issue here. So I do have a difficult time really wanting to get to the Tigers. Riley Green's price tag has finally come up, so that's not even somebody I can point to anymore.
Yeah, and then it's not like Manaea is some crazy splits pitcher to the point that number one you just made, and then Artie Van Hoosen in chat is saying that mostly switch hitters does that help his case. I'm not really concerned. This is the best pitching option on the slate to me in Sean Manaea. There's always going to be a case lefties have to face right-hand pitchers sometimes, right-hand pitchers have to face left-hand batters. I think this is a really good spot for Manaea. Unless we see something crazy happen with his ownership, I wouldn't pick it too much. Just have him in your player pool, play him in cash games. No real second thoughts about that. On the other side here, Drew Hutchison is going to be on the mound for Detroit, and his numbers leave a lot to be wanting this year. Only a 14.3% K rate, but then a 4.92 expected ERA. I think this is a pretty good spot for San Diego and also a chance to do some real damage against a pitcher who lets the ball get put in play a lot against him.
Yeah, and also like a sneaky good park for hitting. It's not great for home runs because the outfield's massive, but typically, like it's got one of the better batter's eyes in baseball, and you get elevated exit velocity here. So really don't even mind taking hitters in this park. And Hutchison's certainly not a particularly good pitcher in any way, shape, or form. So far this year, a 10% strikeout percentage against righties with a 201 expected ISO, 153 expected ISO, and a 20.5% strikeout percentage against lefties in a limited sample. The Padres offense isn't the best. Obviously missing Tatis hurts, but Manny Machado is going to look like a top third base option. Nomar Mazara is very cheap and probably hitting in the middle of the order. Cronenworth is going to be one of the top second base options along with Brandon Lau, I think. So the Padres to me look very good.
Yeah, they're picking up some ownership, but it more or less looks appropriate. Just like before, when you're talking about the Rays top stack odds, well, Padres 7.5% projected ownership, 7.5% top stack odds. So that all to me looks pretty accurate and a team that's going to be a fairly high priority for me. Hutchison's not been particularly good, and I think the Padres are one of the teams that we should be building around. Next game to talk about on the slate is the Cleveland Guardians against the Boston Red Sox. And was the entire Red Sox team on our Chicago trip with us? Because what the hell is going on with this team? Just every time you see a clip of them on Twitter, it's like one of those weird vaudeville type comedy things where should have the like do like music playing behind and stuff like that. It's a comedy of errors. Nobody can catch a pop up on the Red Sox. They can't field ground balls. And for whatever reason, the score everything's a hit in Fenway as well. It doesn't matter what the defense does. The official score, everything's getting ruled a base hit. So I don't know what the issue is with Boston here, but we've got two kind of lacking pitching options on the mound. Zach Plesac for Cleveland. Nick Pivetta hasn't been bad for Boston this year. Hasn't been great either, but to match up against a Cleveland team with a 4.9 implied team total here. What do you make of the offenses in this spot? Because I see reasons to get to both of them.
Yeah, I'm interested in both offenses here. Cleveland is a team that we know is pretty difficult to strike out. They do have some power, particularly towards the top of the order. Jose Ramirez obviously is one of the top third basemen every time that he plays. Josh Naylor is a pretty inexpensive option at first base that has some power. Pavetta's got solid strikeout stuff, but he does give up power as well. And that's pretty much been the story his entire career. 172 expected ISO to lefties this year, 180 to righties. So I wouldn't say Cleveland is like my favorite stack. And it does look like they're going a little bit over-owned here in the aggregate, but that's probably also just driven by Jose Ramirez, which is fine. But it's still a pretty nice spot for them. And then on the other side, Boston going up against Plesac. Similar ownership in the aggregate to Cleveland, lower top stack percentage, which kind of surprises me. But Plesac this year, a 213 expected ISO to righties, 197 to lefties. I'm surprised that we have Boston with a lower top stack percentage because I actually think they look better than Cleveland does. I do like getting to them. If they're not going to have Devers, obviously that makes things a lot worse. Also, I don't know if they got hurt or what, but the projected lineup only doesn't have Devers. So Devers is on the injured list, and Martinez is day to day. So there's a chance Boston ends up with a not very good lineup, which obviously would make me less interested. If JD is in there, then you still have, Verdugo, Bogarts, Martinez in the middle, which is pretty nice.
And then one other thing to add to what you said before, I think Pavetta is considerably better than Zach Plesac. It's not to say I think Pavetta is some stalwart at the top of the rotation, but he's a 4.39 ERA this year and a 23% K rate to a 5.62 expected ERA for Plesac and a 16.9% K rate. Boston also being at home. So I think this is a much better spot for Boston and Cleveland. So I agree with you. I think the Boston's top stack odds could use to be a little bit higher. And I do wonder if the field is going to be a little bit sour on playing them just because things have been so shitty coming out of the All-Star break. Do you think this is a spot where we could see recency bias kick in and just get people off of Boston?
I think you could. I think it's more likely that you see the lineup come in and people get off of Boston, kind of like, I just did as I was trying to make the case for why I like them and then realized that they might be missing the guys that I actually like. So I think maybe that's kind of what you see, and maybe that's what the gap is in ownership projection versus top stack percentage. I didn't pay attention to what lineup like we are using, so I don't know if maybe we just have Boston being like more in line with what they're probably going to be around lock. So yeah, I think maybe you see that ownership come down just because the lineup's going to end up sucking.
Yeah, I think that totally makes sense also because this Boston Red Sox lineup, like you said, pretty beat up. Devers, who knows how long he's going to be out for. And then it seems like Boston is trending towards being sellers at the trade deadline also. So there could be some pretty bad times for Boston going forward. But we'll see what that lineup when that lineup comes out later in the day, what it ultimately does to the ownership and the team total and all that later on in the day. Next spot on the slate, it is the Chicago Cubs at home against the Pittsburgh Pirates. Pitching matchup, Adrian Sampson against JT Brubaker. And, there's been spots where I like to play Brubaker for DFS purposes, but it's because he's never picking up ownership. This is different today. It's 7,400, decent matchup against the Chicago Cubs, but doesn't warrant 23% ownership over on DK, Adam.
No. So this is a weird one to talk about because, like, I like Brubaker. And I'm with you. Like, he's somebody that I typically think goes a little bit overlooked. And then here, it looks like it's supposed to be like 72 degrees in Chicago, wind maybe blowing in a little bit. So it looks like pretty favorable pitching weather also. But if the ownership's going to be there, like, why wouldn't I just play Manaea and Ashby? And that's kind of what I keep coming back to. If ownership looks like this, I don't think I get too much Brubaker. Assuming that you're going to get, Ashby and Manaea pushing 40, 50% ownership. And as a result, Brubaker closer to like 10%, then he starts to look pretty appealing because there are plenty of strikeouts to be had in the Cubs lineup. He is a decent strikeout pitcher. And on this slate in particular, 23% strikeout percentage is sixth best, actually fifth best, I think, are the Reds. Yeah, the Reds are the early game, right?
Yeah, the Reds aren't on the slate.
Yeah, so Lodolo's number one, but he's not on the slate. So that puts Brubaker fifth behind Ashby, Gonsolin, Voth, Manaea, and then it's Brubaker. So, like, a lot of times when you talk about Brubaker on other slates, it's like, oh, well, he's got better strikeout stuff than people realize, but, there's also 10 guys ahead of him. Here, he's kind of towards the top. So I do think he's a good play. It's just that I don't think he should be getting the same ownership or close to the same ownership as Manaea and Ashby.
And I kind of think there's a case to roster Adrian Sampson on the other side of the game, whose numbers are fairly decent this year. 3.69 expected ERA, The strikeouts aren't really quite there at 17%, but the Pirates' implied team total is 3.7 runs, which the only teams that have lower than that, we've got the A's at 3.2. The Rockies are at 3.6. The Tigers are actually slightly higher than this. I, Considering the pitching, the conditions being favorable to pitchers in Wrigley today, and that Sampson's been really not that terrible this year, I think this is a pretty good pivot point in the mid range in terms of a cheap guy to get to.
I kind of agree. This is another one where, like, at current ownership, I certainly agree. If you're gonna get, 20 whatever percent going to Flexen and Odorizzi and Brubaker, Sampson is not good, but he's kind of basically Chris Flexen except facing the Pirates. So I think that at 4% ownership, that makes a lot of sense. If the ownership were to change and you get like Brubaker at 10% and Sampson at 4%, I'm probably just going to get more Brubaker in that case. Between the two of them. So I think that Sampson is like at a different tier than somebody like Brubaker. It's reflected in his strikeout percentage, like you said, 15.7%, 4.85 xFIP this year. Not really in the same category as JT Brubaker. But if you're going to get a big gap between the two of them, that's fine. He's still facing the Pirates. He's still capable of going 6 innings and, having a solid start. But I think it's most likely that you're going to see the ownership on those secondary guys come down enough where if I'm not getting to Ashby and Manaea, I'm getting to guys like Brubaker before I'm getting to Sampson.
Yeah, and it's not even that I think Sampson's a great pitcher for fantasy purposes. The strikeouts aren't there. He's kind of serviceable, but I don't think the guys around him that are picking up ownership are particularly good
Right.
either. That's really what the case is to me. Like Adrian Sampson, do I think he's great? No. But do I think Brubaker is? No. Do I think Odorizzi is? No. Do I think Flexen is? No. And I just think Sampson's on the same tier of those guys, and we're getting him for a fifth, a sixth of the ownership. So that's where it makes sense to pivot to me if these ownership projections were to hold. The team totals in this game are really low because of the favorable pitching conditions. Do you see any reason to get to the offenses in this game?
Not particularly. The Cubs do have some power in their lineup. Brubaker does give up some power, which is nice, but doesn't seem like a great spot to be hitting. 120 expected ISO to righties this year for Brubaker, 156 to lefties. If you were going to target him, I think you're looking for left-handed power, but the Cubs don't really have that. They have Ian Happ. That's the only left-handed power that really exists in their lineup. Everybody else pretty much is from the right side that has any semblance of power. So pretty tough to get there. And then on the other side, Sampson, I think the worst pitcher of the two, but the Pirates also clearly the worst offense of the two. So pretty tough, I think, to like either offense here.
All right, so let's move to the next game, and it's one of the only teams that does have a lower implied team total than the Pittsburgh Pirates in this one. That's the Colorado Rockies on the road against the Milwaukee Brewers. And there are a couple of reasons that a team would have a really low implied total against the Brewers. One would be the Rockies just have a bad offense away from home. Ashby, while inconsistent, has overall had a good season this year. Then the Brewers have a really good bullpen behind them, so that often limits the output of opposing teams going up against Milwaukee. But Aaron Ashby right now, 3.46 expected ERA, 26.8% K rate. The Rockies are better against left-hand pitching than right-hand pitching, but it's hard to think this isn't a really good spot for Ashby, particularly when he's projected for a fairly modest 28% ownership share on DK at 7,700. Over on FanDuel, single pitcher site, 7,400. He is fairly popular there at 20% ownership, but I really like getting to Ashby in this spot, and it seems like you're on the same page.
Yeah, for sure. One thing I want to mention, not regarding Ashby, I just realized I was wrong earlier. It's only supposed to be like low 80s in Baltimore tonight, so I guess the forecast I saw a few days ago just ended up being completely wrong. But that just what we were saying about the great, the heat and great hitting weather in Baltimore, maybe a little bit overstated. Probably still humid because it always is here. But just wanted to mention that because I'd said it was going to be hot. Apparently, it's not. As far as Ashby goes, I think he looks great here. $7,700 price tag, certainly reasonable. He has the highest strikeout percentage on the slate at 24.8%. He does walk too many guys, 11.2% walk percentage. He gives up power, but still a 3.76 xFIP. The Rockies outside of Coors this year, about an 82 WRC plus, give or take. I don't have it in front of me, but I looked like 3 or 4 days ago. They don't strike out a ton, around like a 21% strikeout percentage, but at that price tag and given the lack of production from the Rockies outside of Coors, I think he looks fantastic. Against righties this year, 25.8% strikeout percentage, only a 109 expected ISO for Ashby.
This is crazy. Rob Martin posts this in YouTube chat. Chris Bryant's not hit a single homer at Coors this year. All his homers have come on the road. Is that true?
Weird. He was hurt a lot. I wonder how much he's even played in Coors.
Yeah, let's see. He's okay. So I've got his numbers up here. He's played 20 games at Coors, 16 on the road, 0 homers at Coors in 20 games. That's not ideal.
Surprising.
That's terrible. Let's see. What are his numbers overall at home? He's an 84 WRC plus at Wrigley at Coors this year. What a disaster of a signing, Chris Bryant. Like, why even make that signing?
That was such a bizarre, like, you're nowhere near competing. Why are you paying Chris Bryant?
Yeah, a bunch of money to also be hurt and just be on a bad team.
Yeah, I mean, unless the plan is to like trade him at one of the upcoming trade deadlines and like get prospects.
I guess, but yeah, that's crazy that he's not hit a single homer at home this year. But yeah, it's a bad Rockies offense. They have a 3.6 implied team total. It is one of the lowest on the slate. I know that Ashby's been inconsistent this year. I still think of him, though, as one of the pitchers I feel best about on the slate, just relative to the other options here. I'm playing a bunch of Ashby. The 26.8% K rate against the Rockies is really appealing to me. On the other side of the mound, it's going to be Kyle Freeland for Colorado, 5.02. Expected ERA, 15.4% K rate. The Brewers have an implied team total of over 5 runs. How high of a priority are them for you to get to?
Relatively high. Freeland, I think, is an okay pitcher, especially when you get him outside of Coors Field, but he doesn't miss bats, and you do have power in this Milwaukee lineup, which I always just like targeting spots like that. I think it gives you some upside. Hunter Renfroe at 4,100 looks good. If Mike Brosseau's in the lineup at 2,500, that's going to look good. Adames is a good shortstop option. It's just a pretty solid lineup in terms of power and upside against Freeland. So far this year, only a 14.5% strikeout percentage against righties. He has only allowed a 149 expected ISO to them, so it's not like you're expecting them to just go out there and hit a bunch of home runs, but they certainly have the potential. One thing I just saw in chat, Aaron D said, I'm looking to targeting Ashby's hard contact allowed. I don't know what you're looking at, but Aaron Ashby this year, 25.5% hard hit percentage, 25.9% last year. Those are both good. If you look at his expected numbers this year versus his actual, 124 actual ISO to righties, 109 expected, 310 WOBA to righties, 279 expected. He's not who you were looking at or thinking of, I don't think.
Yeah, Ashby has a 339 BABIP, and I think a lot of it's just bad luck. I think if you just take Ashby's BABIP and you normalize it to around 300, you're looking at a guy with an ERA in like the mid to mid high threes, like a 3.5 to 3.7 range. Zips has him projected with a 3.86 ERA the rest of the year. Steamer has him at 3.58. Everybody has him projected to be a high K rate pitcher. I'm not all that concerned about Ashby. I know he's had some inconsistent starts, which that does come with younger pitchers, but it's a good looking spot for him on this slate, and there just aren't that many good pitching options to get to. So I think Ashby, for me, just has to be a really high priority.
Is Chad on crack today? King of Smack said I'm going with all lefties against Ashby. The Rockies are going to have like 2 lefties in their entire lineup.
Yeah. So you're playing what, Charlie Blackmon and Ryan McMahon?
Yeah. Apparently filling out your lineup with those 2 guys.
All right. Play me in head-to-heads. Play whatever tournaments I'm playing. Play me. And I'm now watching both of my homers today. Adam will play somebody in a head-to-head again. It'll be one of those screenshot posts like, look, I played this guy who rostered pitchers at Coors Field, and he put up this crazy score against me in DFS in a head-to-head. But yeah, don't go load up on lefties against Ashby. Like, why? What's the reason?
Well, I mean, like if you want to, sure, whatever. Like I don't think there's a reason. He's striking out 30% of them with a 134 expected ISO. I was more just like, where are these lefties coming from? Because they're not going to be in the lineup.
That too. There aren't that many of them to roster, and the 2 that are Blackmon and McMahon, which individually are fine hitters. Don't necessarily think this is the spot, though.
You're right, though. If that guy plays me head-to-head, he will have one of them because he plays like off-the-board pitchers, and then he almost always plays at least 1 or 2 guys against the popular pitchers. It's like he makes like the most highly leveraged tournament lineup ever and then plays them in head-to-heads. So fully expect if he plays me today that he will have like Blackmon or Bryant or something.
And the one I'm going to homer, and then you're going to lose, and then it'll be funny on Twitter, right? It's a win-win for you. You either win money or you win engagements and content, right?
Yep, exactly.
All right, so there we go. Play Adam in head-to-heads. It'll be good for all of us involved here. Next game on the slate, Los Angeles Angels, Kansas City Royals. Noah Syndergaard, who's had a fairly disappointing season, doesn't hold runners at all, really at any point in his career. Now it's even more problematic because he lets more guys get on base. So stolen bases aplenty against Noah Syndergaard. 4.3 expected ERA, 18.6% K rate. I almost never roster Syndergaard in DFS. At least there was a point in time where it made sense. Not anymore, though. How many stolen bases could we see from the Kansas City Royals today? And does that make him an appealing DFS team to get to?
All of the stolen bases. I hate Syndergaard slates because I always end up stacking the team against him, and somehow and this has been the case even when he was good. I thought he used to be overowned, and I would take guys against him. Now he's not very good, and I take guys against him, and it still somehow doesn't work. But Kansas City, I mean, they're going to run top to bottom in this lineup. Like, it's what this team does. Bobby Witt's going to steal every time he gets on base. Benintendi's not really a base stealer, but he can run on Syndergaard. Michael A. Taylor will steal every time he's on. Merrifield's going to steal every time he's on. Nicky Lopez is going to steal every time he's on. And then, guys like Dozier, Pasquantino, I mean, Melendez, like, it's Syndergaard. I wouldn't put it past them. So, like, anybody that gets on base for this team is going to steal if nobody's ahead of them. And it just gives them so much upside because, it's not that Syndergaard is, like, bad in terms of preventing power or runs this year. 138 expected ISO to lefties, 164 to righties, but he's not striking guys out anymore. And when you're going to allow hitters to put the ball in play, even if we just there's obviously upside for Kansas City as far as hitting goes. Syndergaard's certainly capable of just having bad starts and getting lit up. It'll happen time to time. But even if you just assume that's not going to happen, if you're talking about somebody that's going to allow you to put the ball in play, it's just very easy for guys like that to get unlucky and guys get on base, through BABIP. And in a spot like this, if Kansas City just gets lucky with BABIP, like for most teams, that's not very good from a DFS standpoint because you're just talking about singles here and there and you're not really racking up points. For Kansas City, if they're just getting, seeing eye singles, those are turning into, basically triples and home runs from stolen bases. So I think there's massive upside for KC here, given the amount of speed they have, given the fact that they will be aggressive looking to steal bases. I like Kansas City against Syndergaard quite a bit, even though they have a relatively low implied run total. You can just get a lot of points, even if it doesn't, a lot of fantasy points, even if it doesn't really even result in a lot of runs.
Yeah. And that's the same way I see it as well is, and not, it's not, you could get somebody who gets on first against Syndergaard and it's almost a guaranteed stolen base at times, not just one, but you could see guys steal third against him. He just doesn't hold runners. He doesn't care to. And there was a point where he was getting out so many of the hitters he faced, it didn't matter. And now it's massively problematic at this point in his career. So I think there's more upside in the Royals than a lot of people would realize. And then I'm sure on the other side of the game, a lot of people realize there's typically upside against Zach Greinke. 5.69 expected ERA, 12.7% K rate. Greinke has nothing left in the tank, if you ask me. As far as the Angels go, not picking up that much ownership. And we also have them with kind of low top stack odds, which I'm a little surprised. I know the Angels lineup sucks right now, but it's not worse than Zach Greinke is it?
I don't think so. So people mentioned Bobby Witt in chat. He did leave yesterday's game early. That's something to keep an eye on. Like if he doesn't play, don't play him. If he does play, there is some chance that, they don't run him when he's on base. But just from a hitter standpoint, like if he plays, I'm still playing Bobby Witt. Maybe he doesn't run. That would be frustrating, but whatever. From the Angel side, the first thing I'm going to say is no chance Zach Greinke gets 16% ownership. I don't think. I understand he's 5,900. I understand the Angels strike out a lot, but doesn't seem like that number holds. And if that comes down, maybe you do see the Angels ownership go up a bit. But I do like the Angels here, at least to some extent, as much as you can like the Angels. Greinke's allowed a 202 expected ISO to righties this year with a 15.5% strikeout percentage. Only 145 expected ISO to lefties, but an 8.3% strikeout percentage. If you're going to let Shohei Ohtani hit the baseball, I want Shohei Ohtani in my lineups. Taylor Ward looks good from the right side. Jared Walsh, 2,700, another guy that strikes out a lot but has power. You're going to let him hit the ball. I'll take my chances at that price tag. The rest of the team, not super appealing, but like even somebody like Joe Adell at 2,200, I love the spot against Greinke because this is somebody that has a lot of power. He just has a ton of trouble hitting the ball. And Zach Greinke doesn't get a lot of swings and misses. So it just increases the likelihood that Adell's going to be able to hit it and Adell's going to do damage. So I think Ohtani, Ward, Walsh are like the priorities from the Angels, but I like targeting Greinke in general.
Yeah. And for Sean V's point that Greinke had 30 against the Angels, he hasn't pitched against him this year. So I don't know what year you're looking at. But
Zach Greinke used to be good. So.
Yeah, there was a point in time where he was good. I don't doubt that he had really big games against him in the past, but he hasn't pitched against him this year. And I don't care what Greinke did in any previous seasons because he's 38 years old. He throws like 86 miles per hour now. He throws a changeup faster than he throws his fastball. Now, like I've never seen a pitcher who the reason the changeup is the changeup because it's faster than the fastball. But that's Zach Greinke. Nothing he does makes any sense. All his numbers are terrible this year. If the Angels are going to be contrarian stack against Zach Greinke, Give me the Angels because I just don't think Greinke could reliably get out big league hitters anymore.
Yeah, agreed. One thing to mention here, it seems like it's kind of the trend across everywhere, but the weather in KC is supposed to be around like 75 degrees today after being 100 over the weekend. So this is clearly back to being a park that sucks for hitting. But that being said, I still like the offenses in this game. Stolen base upside for KC, and then anybody facing Zach Greinke at any time in any park.
Yeah, so I mean, both these offenses, I think there's reason to consider both of them. No reason for me to want to get to the pitchers. Today's show, sponsored by PrizePicks. If you guys want to get some free money from PrizePicks, sign up for the first time using the promo code AWESEMO, and you get up to a $100 bonus on your first deposit. Really useful way to start building your bankroll over there. We also got tools over at Stokastic.com. They're going to help build you some very, very good player prop cards. Over on PrizePicks, I know we've got Eric puts out PrizePicks videos every day. But then also we've got tools over at OddsShopper. It's going to give you all the different player prop numbers. It's going to give you projected win rates on those numbers, projected ROIs, all that. So go check out OddsShopper, free resource to use. And if you're signing up over at PrizePicks, use the promo code AWESEMO. Get yourself a $100 bonus on your first deposit. Few games left here to talk about. The next one is the Arizona Diamondbacks at home against the San Francisco Giants. Tyler Gilbert on the mound for Arizona. His numbers are not great this year. 6.76 expected ERA, 14% K percentage. If I'm not mistaken, Tyler Gilbert, he was the guy who pitched a no-hitter in his first career start after toiling in the minor leagues, wasn't he?
Yep.
And it's been all downhill since then.
I remember doing the show and being like, who the hell is this guy? How's he pitching in the major leagues? Blah, blah, blah. I'm going to play a bunch of, I think it was the Padres against him. And then he threw a no-hitter.
And yeah, then once again, just to reiterate, this year, 6.76 ERA, expected ERA, 14% K rate. None of that is all that appealing looking. I hate getting to the Giants as a team just because of the frequency that they pinch hit, but we do have them with the highest top stack odds on the slate. How appealing does that make San Francisco for you?
It's annoying because I'm probably going to get to the Giants here, but like you said, I don't like getting to them, especially when they're facing left-handed pitching because, like, you know that they're going to pinch hit with Lamont Wade and Jock Peterson. Like, those guys are good, and they're going to get them in the game as soon as they can. At least when they're facing righties, it's like, well, they're not going to pinch hit for Peterson unless it's like a close game and they bring a lefty in or whatever. So they're really annoying to get to against lefties. But that being said, Austin Slater is cheap. Wilmer Flores should stay in the game no matter what. Darren Ruff is cheap. Mercedes is 2K flat. So you run the risk of these guys getting pinch hit for, but at the same time too, if they do a lot of damage against Gilbert early, it does lower the chances of them being pinch hit for. Like if you're talking an 8-1 game in like the fifth inning, the Giants don't have the same impetus to pinch hit for their guys as they do if it's like 3-2. So that does work in their favor as well. And then the other thing that we talk about a lot is it is factored into their projections. Like you're just not projecting as many at-bats for guys like Ruff as you would for other players. So you don't want to double count it and just like completely write off the Giants. But I do hate getting to this team in general for that reason.
What are we doing here, chat? Zach Greinke's been good this month. Here's Zach Greinke's fantasy outputs this month. 3.6 fantasy points, 22.9 admitted. That's a good start. And then -4. He's at negative fantasy points in 3 of his last 7 starts. Every pitcher is going to here and there have okay starts. Greinke on the whole has been terrible this year, and he does not have a single start with more than 5 strikeouts. He sucks. Don't play Zach Greinke. I know this is a spot if any pitcher was going to have success, it would be this one just because Greinke he's going against the Angels. Although, is Mike Trout expected back today? I know he's eligible to come off the injured list.
I have no idea.
Let me see. So Mike Trout, I think he was eligible to come off the injured list.
Will not return when first eligible Monday.
All right. So not going to return. Either way, though, Greinke is just not a viable big league pitcher to me at this point in his career. We'll see. Even without Mike Trout in there, I don't see it. Like I said, he's at negative fantasy points in 3 of his last 7 starts. It hasn't gone well for him.
I just don't really see the reason. Like if you tell me I have to put a sub 6K pitcher into my lineup, then sure, it's Zach Greinke. But that's nothing to do with Greinke. I mean, it's just that the alternatives are Adam Oller and Drew Hutchison. But I just don't really know why I would need to get to that price point when like you can spend 15K on pitcher, 16K on pitching today and have like 2 of the highest strikeout percentages on the slate. I just don't know why you're going to need to get down to Greinke. And if you did need to go sub 6K, I will say, like right now we have Greinke at 16% and Voth at 1. I will go Austin Voth, even though the matchup isn't as appealing, if Greinke is going to be the guy that does get ownership there. So like, I get it. There's just not a lot of cheap options. But one, I don't think you're really going to need them. And two, at least right now, Greinke's getting ownership where I don't see a reason to want to get to him.
Sean V. Greinke does kind of own the Angels. He hasn't pitched against them once this year. Like, what are we basing this on? Yeah, Greinke was good against them 10 years ago, and he won the Cy Young.
Yeah, I mean, he had a couple good starts against them last year, but like, who cares?
Greinke had a lot of good starts against a lot of teams in the past. He used to be really good. He isn't anymore. The other thing, too, about Greinke, I mean, if you guys are rostering, you're not alone. Other people are rostering him. I don't understand that, though. I don't think he should be picking up ownership today, and he is as of now. So, we thought that some of these pitchers, Adam, were going to come down in ownership, but everybody wants to play Zach Greinke, so maybe the ownership isn't going anywhere.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the thing. Like, if Greinke was projected for like 2% ownership and there were like 12K pitchers on the slate that I really wanted to get to, then I could make a pretty compelling case for him. But here it's just like, I don't know what's the reason. In general, you haven't needed cheap SP2s this year because DraftKings just completely has chopped off the top end of SP1 pricing. It used to be that you could create an advantage by finding cheap SP2s because the aces were like 11.5 or 12K and you needed to find cheap guys in order to get good bats. And it's like, I think people still look for those cheap guys, but it's like kind of useless now because you can just spend 18 to 20K at pitcher, even on slates where you do have legit aces. On a slate like this, you can spend 15 to 16K. There's no reason to be like dumpster diving for guys like Zach Greinke outside of like random lineups.
Yeah, I have to say, Sean V, even by your standards, Greinke went off last August against the Angels. It's maybe the worst reason I've ever seen to roster an individual pitcher. That's a year ago. That's so far to look into his game logs. And your original reason also is because he's pitched really well against him this year when he hasn't pitched against them. We're just stretching at this point. Jacob Junis on the mound for the Giants.
Yeah, one other thing, Mr. Nice Guy said, I think people have just subscribed to targeting the Angels regardless. That I agree with. It's fine, perfectly valid. But that goes back to what I was saying. Like, if you needed a cheap pitcher on this slate, I understand the case for Greinke because he is facing the Angels. There's just inherent upside there because the Angels suck. But you can just make him into Aaron Ashby or Mania or somebody better than Zach Greinke, and it's going to cost you like one bat.
Yeah, it's just not necessary on this slate, especially when we have other pitchers like Sean Mania isn't all that popular, at least as of now, at a modest ownership. So there's other guys to get to. And then I do think there's some contrarian pitchers too. I was just going to bring up Jacob Junis pitching against the Diamondbacks today. 4.02 expected ERA, 21.2% K rate. If he's going to be less than 1% owned and people are going to roster pitchers like Zach Greinke, Junis is better than him. He has a little bit of strikeout upside. I don't think this is a bad contrarian pitching option.
I don't think so at all. Not the Angels. The Diamondbacks are below average offensively overall. Junis is not a great pitcher, but a 20% strikeout percentage is middle of the pack on this slate. 3.86 xFIP is solid. He's outside of San Francisco, which isn't ideal, but you should have the roof closed in Arizona, which is still pretty favorable pitching conditions. Against left-handed hitters this year, 19% strikeout percentage, 178 expected ISO. You are going to have a pretty heavily left-handed lineup, I would expect, from the Diamondbacks. But I'm with you. If he's not going to get ownership here, he's just another guy you throw in that like Corey Kluber bucket where I have no idea why Jake Odorizzi and Chris Flexen would get 20 times the ownership of Jacob Junis.
Yeah, I agree. I think that Junis is somebody to look at as a contrarian pitching option. And by the way, I messed this up, guys. I was in such a Zach Greinke rage that I accidentally skipped over the Houston Astros Oakland A's game. And there's another somewhat shitty chalky pitcher to talk about in this game. Jake Odorizzi on the mound for Houston. Great matchup for him against Oakland. Honestly, I understand why people are rostering Odorizzi in this spot. I don't think he should be as popular as he is. But when you got a matchup against the Oakland A's, they have a 3.2 implied team total, which is by far the lowest on the slate. So it definitely seems like books are expecting Oakland to not score all that much. Odorizzi, 4.21 expected ERA, the 18.3% K rate does leave a little bit more to be desired, but it's a pitcher-friendly park. How are you going to be handling Odorizzi, who I do think has some semblance of a floor in this spot at least?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good park to pitch in. It's a good matchup. Odorizzi used to be a pitcher that I liked taking chances on in DFS. He would give up home runs, but he would also get strikeouts. Now he doesn't give up home runs, but he also doesn't get strikeouts. 4.55 xFIP. 18% strikeout percentage, 163 expected ISO to lefties. That's like 70 points higher than his actual ISO allowed. 122 expected ISO to righties. That's like 40 points higher than his actual ISO allowed, but neither number is bad. It's just a solid spot for Odorizzi. I understand why he's getting some ownership. At the same time, I don't think he should be getting 25% when A, Ashby's only getting 28%. And B, you have guys like, Kluber and Junis getting 1%. I do think you see that ownership come down on Odorizzi. He's a solid option, but as ownership currently stands, I would just rather be playing other guys.
And then pitching for the A's today against Houston Astros, Adam Oller, he has been terrible this year. 6.43 expected ERA, 13.1% K rate. We know how much firepower is in the Astros lineup. And Houston not picking up ownership. I get that it's a pitcher-friendly park, but does it matter? Adam Oller sucks. I don't think he could get pitch. I don't think he could get hitters out anywhere. The Astros have one of the better offense in baseball. I think this is a team to be pretty substantially overweight to.
Yeah, I'm with you. One thing to mention here too, you mentioned the park. One thing to keep in mind is that, and this isn't something that like you have to be doing manually. It's going to be baked into projections and all of that. But just from talking through the slate standpoint, I'm much more likely to be willing to take hitters in a park like Oakland when you have a slate like this where it's cool weather across the board. If this were a weekend, they're going to look worse if you're talking the weekend where like it was 100 degrees in every outdoor stadium and the ball is just going to fly everywhere. And then you're playing in 70-degree weather in Oakland. Like you're at a pretty big disadvantage. When the disadvantage just isn't as big when, the weather's cooler across the board. That's going to be reflected in the difference in, team totals. So again, it's not something that you need to just like you shouldn't be manually Xing teams out or anything. It's just I'm more likely to get to the Astros and suck up the fact that they're playing in Oakland when the alternatives aren't as hitter friendly as they were over the weekend. So something else to keep in mind there. 4.9 implied run total is basically just as high as any team we've talked about. They're expensive, but they're not that expensive. The only hitters on DraftKings at 5K or higher are Altuve at 5K, Alvarez at 6,300. Then you have a bunch of like mid 4K guys. The bottom of the lineup is cheap, so you can balance salary that way. But again, when you think about the pitching on this slate, if you just, for sake of conversation, plug in Manaea and Ashby, you have $4,200 per position. That's going to allow you to basically just stack the Astros however you want and then figure out the rest. It's not going to be that difficult. So I do think they're going under-owned here. Adam Oller has not been good in his limited time in the majors so far. He has not been very good at AAA, 5.7 xFIP at AAA this year, 4.98 last year for the Mets. There's nothing that suggests this guy is any good, and the Astros are obviously one of the best offenses.
Yeah, so people asking about Jordan. So Jordan was hurt to start the second half of the year. He's been playing though, but it's somewhat routine for Houston to give him Sundays off. Also, Sundays tend to be afternoon games, and they play the night before. So I think they're going to be cautious with Jordan the second half of the year, but I expect him to play. I think he's going to be in lineup. I could be incorrect about that, but he sat yesterday. I think he should play today, and I don't have too many concerns.
Yeah, I mean, he also played both games of the doubleheader. Both games of the doubleheader against the Yankees. Then he played the first two games against Seattle. I think yesterday was just a rest day.
Yeah, so I think he's going to be in the lineup today. I get that he might be listed as day-to-day or whatever tag they have him over on the DK app, but not too concerned. And if something changes later on the day, then we could readjust. But as of now, yeah, I do think that Jordan will be in the lineup. Next game to talk about, and two left on the slate. Do us a favor, guys, like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Check out all the rest of the content we have today. So we're going to have the deeper dive and live before lock later on the day. I do think we're going to be seeing some pretty significant ownership updates. There's also some potential weather concerns that they're going to be talking about later on in the day. As of now, nothing that's causing me to say that we should be removing any games from our player pool, but something to keep an eye on. Next game, the Los Angeles Dodgers against the Washington Nationals. The Dodgers are the most popular offense on the slate, going up against Paulo Espino. Espino sub 20% K rate, 4.86 expected ERA. I think it's a good spot for the Dodgers, but do they warrant the kind of ownership they're getting? The only team on the slate with north of 10% ownership, and it's well over 10%, 13.4.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy how much ownership they're getting right now. Not because it's a bad spot, but just because there's other teams in very comparable spots. If the ownership holds how it is right now, it's just going to be one of those the Dodgers are one of the best stacks. If you go position by position, Will Smith, one of the best catchers. Betts, certainly one of the best outfielders. Turner's one of the top shortstops. Max Muncy, completely broken price, 4K at third base. So I understand why they're getting ownership. But I think the top stacks tool, like even if you wanted to like, differ on who should be 1 or 2 or 3 or whatever, I think it does a good job of kind of highlighting why the Dodgers shouldn't be getting quite as much ownership as they are. I mentioned it earlier. There's 7 teams between 6 and 9% chances of being the top stack. If you want to say the Dodgers should be 1 instead of the Giants, that's fine. But you're still like nitpicking where they certainly shouldn't be twice as popular. They shouldn't be 3 times as popular as the Braves. They shouldn't be almost 3 times as popular as Houston. So I think there's just enough similar teams where if the Dodgers ownership holds how it is, I'm probably just not going to get to them as much as I would be getting to teams like Houston and Atlanta because they're similar enough. Obviously, I would love to get to the Dodgers. They look very good against Espino, but it's just not. This isn't a Dodgers in cores at broken pricing spot. This is like the Dodgers maybe project a little bit better than some other guys that all have the same range of outcomes type spot.
Yeah, and then starting for the Dodgers, I'm on the same page as you when it comes to the Dodgers. If they're going to be this popular, it's not. I understand why people are getting to them, but I'm not going to get quite as much as the field. There's a lot of good spots to get to. A lot of the pitchers suck today, so there's a lot of offense I want to get to. It seems unlikely to me that there's going to be one team that I want to have in that much more of my lineups than everybody else.
Yeah.
But the pitcher,
and like I'd said it at the top that typically if you go back and like look at my lineups the next day, you'll see that I either jammed in like a small group of pitchers and spread out offenses or vice versa. This does look like a slate to me where I'm likely to be pretty condensed on pitching, especially with the ownership looks right now, and then spreading it out across like as many of these offenses as I can.
and then what do you make of Tony Gonsolin as a pay-up pitching option? I think he's headed for some regression the second half of the year. A lot of his numbers indicate that, but it doesn't mean his numbers are bad. 24.2% K rate, 2.98 expected ERA. The Nationals have a pretty low implied team total in this spot. And we're getting modest ownership on Gonsolin. 10-2 on DK is projected for 11% ownership. 10-2 on FanDuel projected for 5% ownership. Do you like paying up for Gonsolin to be contrarian? We don't really have the same pitch count concerns we've had about him in the past.
Yeah, I think it's fine. It's not a priority for me. It's kind of like Fried. The matchup is better, but also, Washington is tough to strike out. So I don't mind getting him at the reduced ownership. He is a good pitcher. I think he's been lucky a lot in the first half as well, but he has the second highest strikeout percentage on the slate at 24%, 3.73 xFIP. He's a good pitcher, and there's going to just be some lineups where it doesn't really cost you much. Like if you have a cheaper stack, it doesn't affect your lineup much to go from Ashby or Manaea to Gonsolin. And lineups like that, I think he's fine. He is, I think, kind of just paying up to be contrarian. Like he shouldn't be this much more expensive than guys like Ashby and Manaea, but I don't have any issue getting there. As far as the question, Stephen Leibowitz asked about Muncie. Said if we say Greinke is shot based on this season, what do we say about Muncie hitting 159? One, we're not saying Greinke's shot based on this season. He hasn't been good for a really long time, and he's like 80 years old, so it makes sense. Muncie was playing through an injury earlier in the season, but also 209 BABIP for Muncie this year. His expected ISO against right-handed pitching is 50 points higher than his actual. His expected WOBA is 30 points higher than his actual. Combination of injury and hitting into bad luck. But a lot of it is, when you're talking about guys, you want to keep in mind who you're talking about. Max Muncy should not be just done. Zach Greinke absolutely has been showing for a long time that he is absolutely washed.
And month by month, Muncie has produced better this year. It's still well underwhelming relative to recent years for Muncie, but 77 WRC plus in March and April, 86 in May, then June to 97 WRC plus. Is 97 a mark that we would like to see from Muncie? No, but it's somewhere around league average, and it is better than what he was doing earlier in the year. To Adam's point, he was dealing with injuries earlier in the year, so perhaps as he gets healthier, that should also help. I also think when you see somebody who's dealt with injuries, there's a case to be made that the All-Star break and a little bit of a layoff, that could also help him get healthy. So Muncie, I don't think he's as good this year as he's been in previous years. That's apparent from looking at the numbers, but I don't think he's an outright fade because of that.
Yeah, I mean, and also, so in the month of July, 53% hard hit percentage for Muncie this year, 38% in June. I think it was even lower. May, he was at 25%. Like he was for sure playing through an injury earlier in the year.
Yeah, and we even saw at one point he got put on the injured list, and they gave him some time off. And now they have moved him down the order. For the longest time, the Dodgers were really stubborn. Like, no, Max Muncy hits third or fourth for us or whatever. But they have moved him down in the order at this point. Is he my favorite hitter roster on the slate? No, but I wouldn't totally avoid him either. Really, my concern with the Dodgers is I think as a team, they're going to be a little bit too popular.
Yeah, somebody said JV kind of old and he's in the Cy Young race. Yeah, like Justin Verlander's still good. Zach Greinke hasn't been good for a long time. They're not comparable pitchers at all.
Nope, they are not. And the final game to talk about on the slate, and then we will be wrapped up for the morning. Seattle Mariners at home against the Texas Rangers. It is going to be Chris Flexen, who is oddly popular today for reasons that are totally beyond me, because the Rangers offense has been somewhat decent as of late. Flexen has a 5.02 expected ERA, a 16.4% K rate. There's a lot of weird pitchers that are picking up ownership today. Flexen is the one that makes the least sense to me.
I think Flexen's the weirdest. I mean, it's a good park to pitch in. That's about all that I have to say here. The matchup isn't great. Flexen is not good. 16.3% strikeout percentage, 4.98 xFIP this year. Like, I understand that at least with Odorizzi, where you can just stream pitchers against Oakland and be fine. But Texas isn't that kind of offense. Again, I think the only thing I can point to is that he's pitching in Seattle, which is obviously a really good place to pitch, but is that really enough to just drive his ownership up as high as it is? Semien, Seager, Lowe, Heim, Garcia, all of these guys are solid. Calhoun's good. I don't see it with Chris Flexen.
No, and the other thing too is numbers suck this year. It's not like this is his first start at Seattle. This has been an ongoing thing for him. He's been making starts in Seattle this year, and the results are not all that great. At home this year, he has a 4.46 xFIP, and he has a 17.8% K rate. Why is this home start any different than all the other ones he's made this year? He hasn't found that much success. I almost think the Texas Rangers, if Flexen's actually going to remain this popular, I mean, I like to roster hitters against Flexen anyway because he's no good, but for the leverage purposes, I think they make even more sense in large field tournaments.
Yeah, I mean, I hate taking hitters in this park, but I'm with you. Like Adolis Garcia in particular, Flexen's allowed a 219 expected ISO to righties this year. We know Garcia has enough power to hit it out anywhere. Semien, second base shortstop eligible now. He's expensive, but he looks pretty good. You can always play Seager, Lowe, and Heim. Calhoun's really cheap and has been hitting the ball really, really hard this year against right-handed pitching. A 184 expected ISO, 313 expected WOBA, 91.6 average exit velocity for Calhoun is, I think, tied with Garcia. That's behind Seager for the highest on the team. So I like Texas's matchup. I still kind of just have trouble in this park, though.
Yeah, I also generally don't like to roster offense here, but at the same time too, Flexen's popular. The Rangers only project for 1% ownership, and we have him with 3.5% top stack odds. So even just based on that, it would make some sense to me. Then we also add the Flexen ownership into the equation. Other side of the game, Glenn Otto, another shitty pitcher, 5.84 expected ERA, 17.4% K rate. I like the home run derby. I think it's fun to watch. But Julio Rodriguez apparently got hurt in the home run derby, might have to go on the injured list now. I don't know how the Mariners could feel great about that. Julio Rodriguez says he has no regrets about being in the home run derby, other than the fact that he didn't win. But the fact that he's hurt now seems like a pretty big issue when it comes to the Seattle Mariners. So how much I like them is going to depend a little bit on whether he's in the lineup or not. And I usually don't put that much stake into individual hitters, but he's been such a massive part of the Mariners offense. So that's going to matter to me. As of right now, it looks like a team to get to, but somewhere around neutral odds, 4% ownership, 4% top stack odds. What do you make of this spot for the Mariners against Glenn Otto?
I'm with you on Rodriguez. I mean, he's obviously just such a massive ceiling player that if he's in the lineup, he just kind of like can pull ownership towards the Mariners, whereas if he's out, it makes them look a lot weaker. So he's going to look really good if he's in there. The one guy that I would point out individually as well is Jesse Winker at 3,700. He's another like Muncie type where he's just, if you just look at his surface numbers, he's having a really bad year, but he's only 3,700. His expected ISO against right-handed pitching this year is 74 points higher than his actual. His expected WOBA is 58 points higher than his actual. He has a 257 BABIP. He has a track record of being a very, very good hitter. Glenn Otto this year, 230 expected ISO to left-handed hitters with a 17% strikeout percentage. I think Jesse Winker is very underpriced at 3,700. Again, the park sucks, but aside from that, I love the spot for Winker. Julio Rodriguez, again, if he's in the lineup, obviously that's good. Ty France has power. Suarez has some power. So still a tough team, I think, to really want to stack a lot given the park, but individually, really, really like Winker and like Rodriguez if he's in there.
All right. So that is going to do it for us today. If you haven't done it yet, guys, do us a big favor, like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel and check out all the rest of the content we have for today. MLB Deeper Dive, MLB Live before lock later in the day. We'll have a much better sense of what some of the ownerships are going to look like and what's going to happen with Sean Manaea. Is he going to be more popular? I would think so, but maybe not. Check all that out later in the day to know for sure. Other than that, Good luck, and I hope you guys have a great rest of the day.